Dr. Tamara Butler has made a lot of moves since she became the executive director of the Avery Research Center. Today, I talk one-on-one with Dr. Butler for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Dr. Tamara Butler, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Obviously, you're the executive director of the Avery Research Center here at the College of Charleston. I know from Johns Island, where you grew up, to the Charleston County School of Arts, to Michigan State, to now executive director of the Avery Research Center. What would be the thesis statement about your life thus far?
A thesis statement? That's a good question. I mean, I think my thesis statement will probably be Tamara Butler is a lifelong learner and is continuing in that vein. So,
what are you continuing to learn right now?
Well, right now I'm learning a new skill. So I think I've mastered or am mastering the skill of being an academic. I think now we're at a new turn where it's about learning to be an academic leader. So that runs a different kind of place. So the fact that the Avery Research Center is really at the intersections of the college and the city in the Tri-County area. So I'm like, oh, okay, how do we build these kinds of conversations and partnerships? So I'm still learning.
And what conversations are you having right now in this particular community about Avery?
So right now we're trying to tell new stories about Avery. So one is Avery has always been at the forefront of educating Black community members and really making sure that we create critical educators. And the fact that Avery, I think I just had someone speak to me and they said, oh, well, everybody knows Avery is an archive. And I was like, yeah, but I don't think people know what an archive is. They just, assume it's a place that holds a lot of really dusty boxes and photographs and, grandma's old clothes. And I'm like, no, it's more than that. We have photographs, we teach people how to use the archives. Yes. And so for us, it's really getting people to understand what is an archive, how it can be used. And then also another conversation we're having is what is our responsibility to educate? So my favorite thing is we have a garden that we're putting in the back of Avery. And so we're using it as a teaching space. So just kind of thinking education largely is one of the conversations we're trying to have.
And I'm going to get to you all as soon as possible about archiving my interviews as soon as possible. But let me ask you this. What partnerships are you developing right now for Avery?
So right now we're looking at partnerships. We're very excited about thinking about things that are on people who are on campus who don't know about us. Really reaching out to staff and faculty and students who don't know that we're there or what we do. And then the other partnerships are really off campus. So the on-campus success that I'm excited about is working with women and gender studies to do these kind of book conversations with authors. We've had a long-standing with African American studies and history. And so those ones are really great. And so we're looking right now, I'm excited that we're working with the Gibbs, hopefully, with their artists in residence to bring those kinds of conversations with their artists who either look at Black life or who are Black, to bring those kinds of conversations together. So we're looking to host maybe co-sponsor a conversation with their artists in residence and maybe a scholar to talk about the connections between art and scholarship and research.
What is that connection right now, Dr. Butler?
Well, I think it depends. For me, I think about people who are writing about Black people and Black people as laborers, and really thinking about Black people as innovators and creatives. And so it makes perfect sense to be in conversation with someone who is a creative and putting that alongside someone who's a scholar and saying that we're very similar. Because I think academics, especially those who are thinking outside of the box, who are like, oh, I want to put history in conversation with visual culture, or in conversation with Native studies, or in conversation with women and gender studies. Those individuals are always thinking outside the box. We're always trying to figure out how do you piece this together to make sense to a larger audience. And so and I think artists do the same thing. And so just trying to have this understanding of us as creatives on both sides. I think a lot of times people think of academics not necessarily as very creative, Um, but I'm like, I think that they can be, and so that's what I'm hoping that this conversation will spark.
What is your audience right now, Avery?
Everybody. Our audience is everybody. I think through the digital classroom, we were able to really reach out to more folks. So as of March, April, we launched our digital classrooms, and really got even a wider reach. So people who cannot physically come into 125 Bull Street was able to tune in and still talk to our staff and talk to some of our biggest supporters, scholars, lawmakers, and really think about and change makers. So I know we had conversation with people in health, and so really asking the question of, like, well, what can we do? So yes, you wrote this book, and yes, you're working at the state house, or yes, you're working at a local hospital. So what does that mean for me as a community member? Before that, we used to have tours, so we had K-12 students and teachers coming through. People were just curious about Black history, stop by, and then people who are descendants of Avery's graduates. So when Avery was a teaching training, and then it became a high school, all of the wrapped into one. So we have the Averyites and descendants of Averyites, and then you have just a larger population of people who are like, hey, what are you all doing over here?
Mm.
What can we learn about Black history and local Black history from this space?
What can we learn now about Black history?
Everything. I mean, I think Black history unlocks a lot about the future for us. And so I think that there are people who are deeply concerned about, um, well, like, oh, these ideas are new. And I think
Mm.
that for us, that they're not new. We've always watched Avery try to tackle those issues around educational inequities. So the fact that you're a space where Black teachers could become certified, that we have been thinking about our papers are really an archive for a repository for
Right,
people's activist work. So I'm thinking about, like, we recently lost Mr. James Campbell,
right.
and I'm really honored and touched to even know that he entrusted us with his life's work. And so those are the kinds of things that it's like, if we want a blueprint for how to move through the future, I think it's good to go back to the past and really dig in those boxes, look at the photographs. Um, my favorite example that I would probably give of what Black history can teach us about the future is a photograph of a young woman, 1931, standing up in a garden at Avery, and I think a lot about what can that teach us? In the 30s, the world was on fire, right? Like, we're still dealing with racism, we're still dealing with sexism. You're still, you're coming up out of the depression around this time. And so what I think is key is, someone once taught me that wildflowers grow from the ashes, from like scorched earth. And so I feel like it represented for me that Avery was this space where Black people felt like they could come up out of a scorched earth, right? And so I think that was really key for me. Of We're in that moment again, with COVID, wildfires, climate change. This is what we can really think about at this time.
And I might be asking a redundant question, Dr. Butler, but how do you create interdisciplinary approaches to education, exhibits, and research?
Re- Repeat the question for me. I think we both froze.
Rose, yes, ma'am. Yeah, how do you create the interdisciplinary approaches to education, exhibits, and research at Avery?
Oh, wow. So I think that the interdisciplinary approach would be thinking about multimedia. A lot of the beauty of our staff is that they all come from different backgrounds. We are an intergenerational staff. I can say that. So I think the thing for me would be trying to find ways that we think about multimedia. So we're drawing from history, we're drawing from African American studies, we're drawing from women's history, sociology. We're drawing all of these together into this one space to understand a text. And we're also drawing from it in order to make sense of, like, how do we do storytelling. So to take all these different fields of study, all these different disciplines, to analyze artifacts to tell stories to help various community members understand what we're trying to say and make sense of things. So that would be my biggest thing. I think about an exhibit that we have around Gullah Geechee community members, and I think it was really helpful to have that kind of photographs from some of our graduate students there, alongside some of our long-standing artifacts like sweetgrass baskets to
Sure.
kind of videos. So just thinking about interdisciplinary as also like multimedia.
Yes, ma'am. And this might be another a question, a difficult one, but how do you increase collaborations undertaken with donors and external organizations to enhance the creative culture programming in Avery?
Yeah. So I think when you think about donors and you think about the kind of partnerships that we should be having, I think for me, it's getting donors to understand. Hold on, just 1 second. Okay, sorry
Okay.
about that.
Oh, no worries. I
can
can
you
let
can
me.
you repeat
Sure,
repeat that for
sure,
me? Sorry, thank you.
sure. How do you increase collaborations undertaken with donors and external organizations to enhance the creative, obviously, culture programming at Avery?
Yeah. So for me, I think donors have been really. I don't even know how to describe it. Donors have been very generous.
Okay.
So, for example, we have a recent donor who saw that we're interested in oral histories and seeing that I'm from Johns Island and my research is looking at the Sea Islands,
Yes.
that we really want to, they invested in that project. And so being able to say, here's the funds, you determine what we want, what you need there at Avery. And so for us, we want to be able to use that to not only collect stories, but think about how do we build a platform to keep some of those stories. So that's been helpful. Also thinking about programming, so it allows us to say, okay, we want to be able to tell a certain story. So we want to talk about the oral history project. We also would like for donors to think with us about um, really thinking about how do you attract people to share their stories, because we also know that as Black community members, we are very wary of people, and we have every right to be in terms of our stories that we tell. And so for us, is really saying, okay, well, you can trust us at the Avery with your research, with your papers, and with your family's kind of memories, because we want to do things responsibly. We understand the ethics of that. And so for us, we really rely on donors to think about um, how we can speak to community members so that they'll be willing to see themselves as donors, so that it's not always about really large checks, but being able to share those materials with us. And then also thinking about programming that would allow people to see how we're making sense of the things that we receive. So using those two things together has been kind of helpful.
And what else has been helpful in obviously your donors and obviously gathering collections?
I think what's been really helpful is help people understand all of the parts of what it means to have a collection at Avery. And so I just talked to my staff yesterday, and they said that people have that community members are very excited about Avery to the point that they just kind of drop stuff off
Yes.
at the front door. And it's like, well, that's not usually how this works.
Right.
Um, right. And so for us, we want people to understand that acquiring collections is being able to find somebody who can financially support it and maintain it, but also having a staff who is careful, intellectually curious, and qualified to just talk about what that is. And so for me, in order to make any of this possible, we need people to understand all the levels of it. It's, there's a process of, well, where would this fit for us? It literally in our space. Where can it fit in our digital space?
Right.
Who could process it? Who might find it interesting? And how do we share that with other people? And so that's the key for me, is trying to attract people to say like, hey, we have all of the Black Sea Island stuff here.
Yes.
Don't you want to come by? So that's really been helpful for us. Is really thinking through what does it take to make a collection and translating that to community members and making that very clear. so that we can please stop getting boxes of unidentified objects left at Avery for us to make sense of. So yeah.
Yeah, and I know all about that processing. I'm still trying to get that, some of my interviews converted so that I can send it to you all digitally. But let me ask you this: how does
Sure.
Avery increase the quality, and availability of research products?
I think we do it really through digital, right? We're moving digitally, so we try to increase it, and really thinking about the quality of it and the quantity of it by working as quickly as we can. So we have an archive staff, full time archive staff of about three,
Right,
and then we have two graduate students each year who work with us. So they're in the Masters of Public History program. And so through them, that we come together and say, okay, how can we process this information? And so we're trying to find different platforms. Our students, our faculty, and our staff are all really brilliant and exciting, and excited about the work at Avery. They're committed to Avery, and so through them, they would like to think about digitizing. I know we constantly keeping an eye on digital humanities work. And so, how are people building like Tumblrs or
yes,
using Instagram
you're
or
right,
building websites? So,
right,
we want to be able to do the same thing with Avery so that it's accessible. Because right now we are the only museum in the area that covers African American history and the diaspora that's free. So there's no cover charge, there's no ticket sales to see us when we're open, and so we're accessible in the sense that pre-COVID, you could just kind of schedule an appointment and drop by. Now during COVID, we're not completely open, but we're still free. Our resources are still free and available through the Low Country Digital Library. You can always scroll through photographs. You can literally flip through the pages of scrapbooks. So I think like those are part of it. And then our archivists are helpful. So if you ever need something, we're not a genealogy space, so we can't help you track your family tree. But if you have a family name, we can at least pull things for you and send it at a very low cost, and that's because of donors. Um, so yeah.
And how do you continue to evaluate your entire permanent collection and education collection on a yearly basis to identify areas of improvement and objects which need to be removed from collection due to poor conditions or lack of information?
hmm So it's the archive team. So our archival faculty and staff, they look at it.
Okay.
Right now, they're doing a complete overhaul in the climate, and even before we got into a very like racially volatile climate, which I don't think we ever got out of. But I think that one of the things that they did is really look at what keywords are we using to talk about Black life. Are we still using, our racial epithets still in our work? In some of the collections, because we do have items that we've acquired that were donated from members of the Ku Klux Klan, right? So, but that came in, and so that's how we may have gotten our chains or how we've gotten badges of enslaved people coming through that kind of context. And so we want to be able to figure out like how do you put a keyword so you can search it that's not offensive and that word's not outdated. Like we don't want to keep using negative words to think about Black people, so we don't want that in our archive. The other thing that we do is we're having conversations often about, well, what do we need? So we always have our ear to the ground. So recently it was brought to our attention through Fresh Future Farm and their work with the South Carolina Black Farmers
Right.
Conference that we don't have a deep collection about Black farmers, right? So that's important to know. I'm like, that's odd that we would cover so much agricultural communities, agrarian communities, and we don't have that piece of information. So we're assessing it by having a team that looks at it, and then we're also always interested in what people could think we may need to cover that we actually don't have.
And this might be a redundant question, Dr. Butler,
Sure.
but will you build a capacity for expansion?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I say that because the answer is yes. We will build a capacity. It requires a lot of fronts. So one of the fronts that we need to build capacity is at the college level. And so that's asking the College of Charleston to invest in the faculty and staff that we need. Right now, we're a staff of about 10 that does the job of a staff of about 20.
Right.
Sometimes I think 30. And so for us, I think we want the capacity to be able to really offer tours and have a team dedicated to that. We want to have a team that's really dedicated to just education, museum education at the university level and at the K-12 level. And so we're looking at grants to do some of the work to help us think about this capacity building and renovating, so that we have space. So that's the other thing is if we employ all these people, they all can't fit in 125 Bull Street. So we would like for them to fit in 123 Bull Street, which is right next door.
Sure.
So those are the kinds of things we want. We're looking to expand our space so that we have office space and meeting space for those staff members and faculty members, and then really asking the college to make a commitment, and even donors. So if there's a donor out there that's looking to do an endowment, endowments are great because endowments are able we are able to fund faculty members through those and recruit some of the best and brightest. And it would be even better if the best and brightest were people who are from South Carolina who hadn't really thought about returning home. So
And you just touched on it, but let me ask you, how will you build the center's endowment to ensure a solid and sustainable financial base over the next 5 years?
so how will we build an endowment? You know, my hope is really talking to talking to our Averyites, and our institute board members. The other part is really asking anyone who's been deeply impacted by Avery to consider what that would mean and sitting down at the table. I like sitting down at the table with donors. I really like sitting down at the table with donors with my staff because they have a longer history with the center than I do.
Okay.
And so saying, what does it take to make this possible? At the time, I think our administration at the college level has our ears open. Some of them are. And so for me, I really would like for it to be a conversation of like, how can we get an investment? Corporations are great. That's fine. But I really believe that Avery has always been about ground up work. And so if those kinds of endowments can come in through one large gift and then people kind of feeding in, knowing that this is going towards recruiting faculty or recruiting, especially if that faculty is like recent graduate students, or scholars who are at the senior level and are like, I'm tired of being in Wisconsin. Like I want to come to the Carolinas, and then they will be able to attract more scholars with them through that kind of move.
Yes,
So, yeah.
indeed. And I'm on the laptop right now. How can I go and donate and help the Avery Research Center?
Yes, you can go to avery.cfc.edu. So cofc.edu. And you can always donate, and you can also email us. You can email us at averyadmin.cfc.edu. That's really helpful because, especially if you're thinking about ongoing gifts. So I know sometimes it's like, oh, today I got an extra $20. I'd like to give it to Avery. We'll take it. But if you're also like, oh, I'm going to have an extra $20 every month or an extra whatever, we would like to sit down and think about gifts. And making those sustainable because those are really those are helpful too. So yeah.
And I know you just came over here to the college, but from say May of 2020 to right now, what exactly have you all collected?
What have we collected? I don't know what our newest collections have been since May 2020. I feel like the archival staff has really been processing. So I'm not sure what our newest acquisitions are, but I do know that they are working through several collections that we've just been like, we haven't been able to get to, whether it's the Drago papers about the book on Avery, or whether it's finally getting to have conversation about Saul Legree and that community. So it's really been a lot of processing. Not so much new acquisitions. We have a lot of digital things. that we're just trying to sort through. And because the college has been making a shift, so a lot of our things have been, which we might consider like nerd work. It's really like library nerd work. Is the kind of the behind the scenes stuff. So moving things to archive space, we're getting a new website. So
Oh
all of these
yes.
things that are behind the scenes that really make us pop and make us more accessible and easier to search. So that's really what we see more of that than we have seen of acquisitions of new collections.
And Miss Mayo and Asia and all those folks are really, really great people. Uh,
Yes.
what do you know about this region over the next 10 to 15 years that will actually affect the Avery Research Center?
So what do I know about? Say it again. What was the first
Yes,
word?
ma'am. What do you know about this region right now that will affect the center in the next 10 to 15 years?
I mean, I think it's the development. It's a lot of different things. So in this region, I understand that we are getting a new International African American Museum, and that has people excited and people nervous because it is literally a large building that sits on the water, and so people feel as though um, it will overshadow, like it's like it will bring attention to Charleston, but it will also there are community members who feel like it will overshadow smaller monuments, memorials, and spaces. And I think that in this region, we have the potential to either to find synergy, and really talk about what are the differences and what are the spaces that we can use to talk about this work together and talk about Black history across the region. So I don't think that there's anybody um, who has like the key to Black history. I don't think there's one space. I think that there's also development that's really going on and impacting the community where we're seeing people being displaced due to gentrification. We have no idea what the outcomes of COVID will be. We just had a conversation about the impact on tourism. So I think all of those things are going to impact Avery. Avery is prepared to think about that because right now we don't get foot traffic, right? Like we don't have any foot traffic, but we still have tourists. And so, how do we still speak to those individuals who want to learn more about Black history? How do we speak to the people here in the community? We know that education is going to be deeply impacted by COVID, whether it's teachers being able to have access to the curriculum that they want to teach. Right now, I've been listening to this conversation about more testing, which I think is a terrible idea. I've never been a fan of standardized tests. And when Seattle teachers decided that they didn't want standardized tests anymore for their students, I was like, we can do that too. I don't know what that's going to look like because their teachers union is strong. And so in Charleston, my hope is that Avery can continue to equip teachers, um, advocate for teachers so that we have equitable education for our students. That's something I know was going to be deeply impacted, and that people here in the city feel welcome, and that they can engage in the same kinds of stories and histories that tourists see, rather than feeling as though they're outsiders and not welcome in their own city. And so I want Avery to help with helping people feel welcome and feeling as though their story is a part of Charleston's story.
Now, do you fear that the International African American Museum will overshadow Avery?
I don't. I don't feel that way. I think people do feel that way because of where it is, right? Because of where it's located.
Right.
People know this idea of like shiny new, and then it also has international in the title, so it's like, oh, it's going to have this draw. I don't think it's going to overshadow Avery. I don't think it. I think it will overshadow Avery if that's its intent, right? And if Avery allows that to happen, I don't think that that's the case. I think we can develop partnerships and be really honest about what who we're created to serve. I think as a collective, we're here to tell African American stories, and stories of the diaspora. I think the thing is that Avery is equipped to tell Charleston's story, because we have the archives. And so it's really, because I'm also a member of IAM's board,
Right.
that I will hopefully be able to have that conversation as well, about what does our partnerships look like, so that they are responsible, that they are ethical, and so that there's and so and also keeping in mind that there are other um, black sites that also don't need to feel as though they will be in the shadow of the International Museum. So, yeah.
And what other conversations are you hearing about the Black diaspora?
Other conversations that I'm hearing that I would love for us to be a part of is about Black Islands. I said that once, and I'm going to say it again.
Okay.
I think what we're seeing in places like Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Haiti. So we think about the Caribbean, but what about Black people who may be in the Pacific Islands, right? Black Pacific Islanders, or Black islands on the other side of the African continent, right? So on the east and west side. So how do we have those conversations about the diaspora that doesn't just connect us to just Black Atlantic, but might connect us to like Black Pacific or Black Indian worlds. And I think that that's really important. I think the other conversation that in a place like Charleston that's key is thinking about Black Indigenous communities. And so how can we start to have those conversations about Afro Native people and our relationship and our responsibility to them? And so those are conversations I think are really key. I don't know how many people are having them here locally, and if they're out there, I would love to hear from you. So that's a big conversation for me, as well as I'm seeing it happen more and more in these conversations about Black agrarian communities.
Right.
So Black farmers, Black agriculture, um, Black vegans, Black plant based folks. And so, how do we have those conversations that get us to think about wellness, not just in like, oh, I'm eating plants because I want to be healthy, but also what does that mean for land? What does that mean for property? What does that mean for who we are as a people, culturally and more? So, those are some diasporic questions that I'm interested in. I mean, there's more, but those are the ones that are like at the top of my list that I'm got my antenna out for.
And lastly, what do you hope the conversation will be about the Avery Research Center in the next 10 years?
I mean, I hope that it will be seen as a hub. I think it already is, and I think that in 10 years, I would like for the conversation to say, I like to hear conversations that Avery really advocated for teachers, and um, it wasn't just a matter of we provided curriculum, but also that we were able to connect community members with teachers so that they felt as though they didn't have to teach everything. That we start to really think about elder knowledge and community knowledge as important in K-12 education, and Avery helped us, as educators see that, and as community members see themselves as educators. That we were able to advocate at the state house if we needed to say, hey, you know, this policy on education is probably not the most effective. It's probably not going to be the best for our children. It's not going to be the best for our teachers. So the thing is, I want the legacy to still continue there, as well as in 10 years, I would love for us to be able to say that Avery's campus is is bustling, right? So we want 123. Hopefully, we'll be up and running by then, and then we'll have our artists in residence and scholars in residence coming through. We'll have postdocs around campus. We'll really have the faculty and staff that we need to make us feel like a thriving, bustling center. I mean, we already are, but it'd be even better if we could do it where we wasn't running on all cylinders all the time, and that we was actually delegating responsibilities to others, to a larger team. So, in 10 years, I would like to say that Avery and the International African American Museum have found a good partnership and found a good bridge to work, that we've both been able to commit to educators at some level. I know what Avery's commitment will be to educators, and then also thinking about being able to really empower community members to take charge of and tell their own stories. So being able to be the kinds of tour guides or interpreters, archivists that I think we are informally, but being able to say now I have the like credentials or at least the place that I need to do that officially.
Dr. Tamara Butler, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Anytime.